Okay, so let's go ahead and create some clouds that you can fly through, and I'll show you how to do that. We've got the preview window open. You can just press F8 on your keyboard to pop that up. And what we're going to do first is just create the environment. Often it helps to set that up just to kind of give you a feel for where we're going. So in the shader tree, under the environment is the environment material. By default, we have a 4-color gradient. Thank God the blue-brown horizon is gone. And this nice gray works really well, but we want to create more nice. And I'm going to create kind of a white down there like that. And then the ground color is also going to be kind of a whitish, like this soft blue right here. And I want to make sure that the sky color is the same. So I'm going to click on that again, and that helps avoid any horizon line. And then the zenith is going to be this nice rich blue. Deep, deep dark blue. And once I have that in place, what I want to do, it's still too purple. What I want to do is actually squeeze that down. So the sky exponent, increase that. And what that'll do is bring that sky value down. And then the ground exponent, you can actually lower if you want, or you can bring it up and tighten it. Makes that white kind of pop back up in there. And then, of course, as we rotate around, you'll see that it looks like we're kind of just up in the high altitudes, which is really kind of nice. What these values are doing, the sky and ground exponent, you need to think of the environment type right here, the zenith, the sky, ground, and nadir, as a sphere, kind of an invisible, infinite sphere around your 3D scene. The zenith being the very top of the sphere, the sky, of course, being the sky, the ground, of course, is that ground plane, and then the nadir color is the very bottom of that sphere. And by squeezing this up, it's almost like there's a gradient around, kind of like in this sphere, and you're just squeezing it together. So you're just squeezing those colors together by changing those values. Okay, so we've got our environment set up. Let's come back here to items and add a volume. So we'll go add item, volume. All right, now instead of this default one that we just had, kind of like in the primer video, what we want to do with this is change a few of the settings. So let's go over here to the transform, and what we're going to do is scale this a little bit differently. And I'm going to pull this back up here so we can see what's going on. Just actually get down to the geometry first. We're going to change the particle shape to a cube this time. Okay, rather than using a sphere, which created a nice little kind of blob, which is what you might think to use clouds. This is actually work a little bit better for us. So for the transform, I'm going to bring this up to maybe, I don't know, 175 or so, 200, something like that. For the Y, I'm actually going to bring it down so it flattens it out. And then for the Z, we're also going to come up just like that. It's just so we have this kind of big flat area that we're going to actually fly through. That'll be what the clouds are generated in. All right, so we're going to close up that transform. It's very, very haphazard random, but just a big flat cube is really what we want. Not too flat. You want some volume in there. All right, so then what we want to do is come down here, cube. The radius, we can actually bring this down a little bit, but I think that's going to work okay for us, somewhere around 300 millimeters. Okay, you can even put a random size, but we'll leave that 0 for now. Let's close that up. For the density, let's increase that. We want a denser cloud, so somewhere around 70% will probably work. And then the fall off, about 50% is fine, level's fine. The hypertexture, amplitude, that's fine. That's the amount of bump in the texture, amount of roughness, let's say, the amount of noise, the amount of bump. Amplitude's always bump when you think of it. Hypertexture scale is fine, and then the effect speed, we're not doing any animation on those in terms of the clouds themselves, so we're going to leave that effect speed off. Render quality will be fine at high, and then use all lights, everything else. Down here at the very bottom, 150, fine. Those default values are all just fine. That's it. Looks nice, doesn't it? No, I'm kidding. Okay, when we go over to the shader tree, if you open up your render, we have just a base material there and a shader. Well, we could start working with that, but instead, let's create a material group for the clouds. So I'm going to right-click on the volume, and all the way at the bottom is Create Item Mask. And then when we go to the shader tree, you'll see that now we have a material group for the volume. That material itself is not really going to do us much good. So let's go to Add Layer, and then under Enhance Modo Textures, under Organic is, no, excuse me, under Noise is Puffy Clouds. Okay, well, still doesn't look like much is happening there. We need to change the effect of those clouds because the diffuse color is not really going to do us much good. Let's right click on that, and under Volumetric Effects, choose Volumetric density. Okay, so a volume is volumetrics. So those all apply. Yeah, look at that. Got some neat little kind of weird cloud things going. Okay, let's work on the texture size of this. So essentially, I just want to increase the Y value. And this gives us that height that we're looking for. You see that? Let me zoom in. So very simply, just by putting that puffy cloud on, increasing the height of that volume density, we get the look we're wanting. And I know a lot of people have emailed like, all I get is just this, if they've gotten that far. This is the trick right here. Isn't that fun? And of course, you can animate that over time if you want. It looks pretty cool. So, okay, let's keep that around 6-7 meters, something like that. That works well. All right. Now, the texture. Let's close this up. Projection type is solid. That's fine. Everything else looks good in here. Fall off type, texture replicator. We're not doing anything like that. We did texture replicators on our snake earlier, but we're not on this. So under the texture layers. Now the blending mode, let's change that to add. Okay. See what it does when we actually add that gradient, add to it. When we change the value to add. It fills, oops, let me go back here. It fills up that volume really well. When it's just normal, it kind of eats away a little too much. And, you know, that's up to you, but I really want to keep this added because what we're going to do is put a gradient on to control it even a little bit more. Now, I want you to think about doing scientific, you know, charts and things for like hurricanes and volumes in the sky. This is a really great way to do it. All right, so for the noise type, instead of this Paralin noise, which is just an algorithm, I think, we're going to choose gradient as the noise type. Okay. Then the seeded 500 is fine. The octaves 5 is fine. Let's bring it up to about 8 maybe. Increase that a little bit. The frequency and all those others seem to be pretty good. And the output controls 0% upper clip and lower clip. If you just take this value, see what happens. It clips away that gradient value. So let's just pull that back to 0. It's going to work just fine for us. And then the bias and gain. Let's increase the bias maybe to about 100. Gives it a little bit sharper edge there, kind of like that, which is kind of cool. So think about now like lint traps in a dryer. Maybe you have an animation that needs that. This is how you can do it. You can put a volume across that little screen when you pull that dryer cap out and you've got this lint. Looks really cool. All right, so that's going to set up those puffy clouds. Now let's just give it a little bit more interest by adding another layer from processing called gradient. And a gradient lets us change a value over time. So blending mode, I'm going to change also to add. We're going to add that gradient. But in order for a gradient to work, two things have to happen. First, how is it going to be applied? Well, instead of the diffuse color, let's right-click and also change that to volume density. It looks kind of square now. Actually, it looks like a piece of foam. That's kind of neat. The input parameter then is our next thing. This is really important. We need to tell this input parameter how we want the gradient to be applied. So the gradient will actually let us vary whatever we're doing, and in this case, these puffy clouds, over a set time, a set direction, and so on. So if I click on incidence, and I come down to sample parameters, we're going to change Y distance of locator, up and down. Okay, but then we need to edit that gradient and change a value. So the value is selected, and in order to create a keyframe, just middle click on that value. Now, take a look at my scene. It's 100 millimeters in each of these squares. So I just need a very small amount. So less than 500 millimeters for sure. So I'm going to pull this in, and then once you do that, you can press the A key, and it'll actually fit that all to view. And I want to bring this down literally just to like 5 millimeters, something like that. But my values are wrong. I want this to be down towards 0%. Okay, so let's just see if we can zoom out a little bit. I'm going to use my wheel mouse to pull that out. So somewhere around 5 millimeters, I want this to be 0%. And we'll pull that way down. Press the A key, fit it to view. And I'm just using my wheel mouse just to pull out. And then if you hold your Alt Option and your Shift, you can actually drag around like that, and that might make things a little faster for us. Now you see that value there? See how that's changing? Let me press the A key and fit it all to view. And so as I increase this, you can actually see that density change. Okay, so we'll keep this about 5 millimeters at 0, like that. All right, so that's where we're at with the clouds. Still not quite where we need it to be. So we'll do one more thing. Now let's go back to the puffy clouds and change its blending mode from add back to normal. Because we've put the gradient on with the volume density, it's not eating away as much and still keeping that huge, large area that we want. Which means when we fly in, we can get these nice puffy clouds. But they're still kind of dark and dingy. What can we do to actually make them a little lighter and fluffier? So here in our Items tab, let's take the directional light and let's make sure it's visible in the scene. We'll press O and go to Visibility, make sure lights are on in cameras. So there's our camera. And let's pull out here. We're just in a perspective mode. And notice that our camera is just next to our light. We want the light actually back here, kind of shining through. So a directional light like this, the position doesn't matter, only its rotation. And what happens now is that when I turn that light around, now I get all of that density showing up. That light actually translates through. And we had set up the properties for that density right in the beginning of the lesson here. So it's totally up to you how you want to light this, but you can very easily just kind of take that right through. And for the light material, go back here to the shader tree, open up that light material. And instead of that bright white, let's just warm it up a little bit. Not that much, but just a little like that. A little warmer light. Now let's get our camera down. Let's animate our camera through here. All right, so I'm going to close out this preview window. And we're going to come over here to render. And what I want to do is just take my camera and fly it through. So let's select the camera. Shift A to fit this to view in our perspective mode. Now it's really big in our tiny little cloud structure. So what I can do is go to display and change the size to 0. And that brings it down and gives us a little more room to work with. What I can do is actually move it manually through here if I want. And let's just press the Y command. And then we can pull this down like this. Remember, our camera view is right here in our render tab. And I'm going to hold the Alt option and the Command key, and I'm going to then click and drag and rotate a little bit like that. So now we're up at that top of that cloud. You can go ahead and change that gradient if you want, but really what I'm going to do first is come back here to the properties for the camera, and then let's change the angle of view and the focal length. So we're going to pull that down, make this a little bit wider like this, and then we're going to zoom in. And that'll give us the appearance that those clouds are even bigger than they really are. Okay, so now you can start seeing all of those in there. So let's create a keyframe for the camera. So press the Y command, Shift Y will actually create a keyframe for everything. Not that we're changing scale on the camera, but it's okay to do. So now what I want to do is just kind of zoom through, and we'll just push through those clouds, and maybe we'll rotate up a little bit. And then let's grab the handle here, and then we'll bank it like that. And we'll zoom through a little bit more. And we got through that cloud layer. All right, so by going to frame 0, changing my camera position and setting a key, and then going to frame 120, that keyframe is automatically added because I had auto key set to animated. And now we've just animated a nice cloud fly through. So we can go a step further. Let me save this. This is Cloud Tutorial. Let's go back to the directional light. Close up Transform. Close this up, and look down here is called Volumetrics. Well, we're using Volumetrics to actually build the clouds. We can also put it on the light source, and the light source is right here off the camera. So I'm just going to move this. Now, I said the directional light's position doesn't matter. That is true when it comes to actually lighting your scene. But when it comes to volumetrics, well, that's a whole different story. So for this, what we're going to do is push this light and kind of get a nice glare glowing. All right, now that's a little bit much. So what I'm going to do is play with the height and the radius. Okay, see the height, it actually extends that out. And then the radius, if I pull that back, kind of shoots it like a beam. Okay, so I like it like that, but it's just way too bright. So let's go back here to the directional light and bring the radiant down. Okay, now this is the only problem with volumetrics, is that sometimes you want just a simple haze like that. See that? But now I lose my light source. Well, what do? This is what I like to do. I like to take the directional light, rename this as volumetric, right click and duplicate. Control D will also work, and we'll call this sunlight. And then for the sunlight, we turn off the volumetrics and then bring our radiance back up. And of course, you can animate this over time as you're flying through if you want. So now you get this glare of this light, but you also get the light itself. And let's parent the volumetric to the sunlight. So we're going to click and drag and drop that on the sunlight. Okay? So I hope that made sense. It's two lights in there, but only one light is actually lighting the scene. The other is actually just volumetric. And technically it is lighting the scene because I never told it not to. But the value of it, the radiant of that light, is so low it's not actually doing anything. All right? So it's an easy way to create a volumetric, but not change your lighting values. Now you can go back into the shader tree, and for that sunlight and the volumetric light, you can create a little bit of a color. So choose a volumetric material, and we can put kind of a nice warm haze on that if we want. And it doesn't change that original light source. And so now we can play our animation through. And now we're not only flying through volumetrics, we have a volumetric light that's bleeding through as well. And I think our light source is actually just a little bit too hot. Let's come back up here to the sunlight itself. Yeah, and bring that radiance back down a little bit, just so it's not quite blowing out. All right. So quick tutorial on making clouds in modo601, flying through them, putting a volumetric light on there. Now, you can get even closer and do a little bit more and play with the noise. And let me just show you that real quick. Go back down to volume. And here in the density, you can change a good amount of these values. But remember that in the shader tree, under the volume, the puffy clouds, this is actually where we have been generating kind of all this noise in here. So for the noise type, instead of gradient, you can go to enhance parallel. And it just changes how that noise is applied. And perhaps that might be a little bit more like you're looking for. You can go here to, I'm going to undo that because I don't want to mess up my keyframes. You can change this also to lattice and flatten it out a little bit. So play with those values, see what works for you. Maybe add a second layer of clouds. Maybe add a variation. Put some puffy ones in there that maybe don't have the volumetric density, and maybe it's just a little softer, and a number of different things. Just try each of those and experiment. And I think the last thing I'm going to do, before I let you go on your own, is pull this down like that. And that's where we'll start out. So I moved my keyframe. Okay, so I'm going to save this scene, load that up, and tweak it, and let's move on to the next.